The battle of wizards and warriors continues with iron swords. The evil wizard Malkiel will take the shape of the earth, wind, water, and fire. Farewell! The fate of the world is in your hands!
You're listening to the Piercing Wizard podcast, and I'm your host, Ryan Willett. I'm a professional body piercer with 20 years experience. I travel around the world teaching technique and safety classes, and I'm a member of the Association of Professional Piercers. Listen in as I talk to my friends and colleagues about our industry so we can all stay sharp. Hi everybody, how you doing? Welcome to this week's show. My guest will be Jef Saunders. We sat down while we were in Sao Paulo, Brazil at the GEP conference, and we talked about a couple different subjects. We don't really have the quietest area. Again, we had to use kind of an unused restaurant in between classes, and on the opposite side of a glass wall is the world's largest tattoo convention. So a little bit of background noise, but the interview still came out good. We've got 3 sections. First one's going to be on Jeff's experience with the Fakir intensives as an instructor and his opinions on getting your continuing education or maybe getting some education before you even get into the industry as an apprentice. The next section, we'll talk about Daith piercings, Daith piercings, and then after that we'll talk a little bit about Jeff's new studio, Gamma Piercing in Michigan. So stick around. Each section's about 20 minutes long, so we've got a pretty long episode for you this week. So stick with us, and I'll be back after part 1. Okay, so I am here in Sao Paulo, Brazil at the GEP Congress, and I am here with...
This is Jef Saunders, APP President, Fakir Intensives Instructor, blogger, hopefully nice guy.
International piercing celebrity. King of the selfies.
All right, I'll take it.
I'll take it. So one thing I wanted to talk to you since we're at an educational conference is your takes on continuing education in the industry. For people who might not be aware of it, you're one of the lead instructors at the Fakir Intensives in California. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, specifically, Fakir class is very near and dear to my heart. I originally took the class in 1999, and at the time, it was considered basically the end of my apprenticeship. When I got back from Fakir, I was a piercer. And one of the great things about that was that when I got back from the Fakir intensives, everything I had learned during my apprenticeship was put in perspective and was updated appropriately. And my world sort of was rocked because I really thought, like, wow, this is a fantastic worldview of body piercing, and that worldview has really stuck with me. I then took every class they offer, which at that point was the branding class and the advanced class, and I started teaching for them in 2004, 2005-ish. And have been part of the team ever since.
Who were the instructors when you took the class originally?
Originally, my instructors were Dustin Allower, Ken Coyote, Ian Bishop, Todd Almighty, and Fakir, and a little bit of help from Eve Zamora. Mm-hmm. And then my advanced class was the same group, and as well as Seth Cameron and Natalie Lowry.
So that's a really good start of a piercing career. I didn't really have anyone teach me anything. I just kind of tried to figure out some stuff on myself through videos. Like I was watching the Pierce with a Pro videos,
cool.
in my friend's living room, and then we'd pierce each other in the bathroom. That's how my career started. And then going to conference kind of blew my mind. And then that's when I really started taking piercing education seriously. I feel like a lot of piercers today, they're not really trying to just figure it out as much. It seems like a lot of younger people in the industry, maybe even some who haven't even had the opportunity to start in an official apprenticeship yet, are hungry for the information, and they're trying to search it out as kind of a primer to their career rather than continuing education for their career.
Right, and it's a really great era to be piercing in, right? Because a lot of times newer piercers have up-to-date information that they were previously not allowed to have. I know for me, when I came back, and I'm not knocking my mentor, but when I came back from Fakir, the new information was threatening.
Yeah.
The new information was something that it's been working so well, why would we update? And I think there's always going to be that element in body art culture. because people don't like, people get comfortable in a place and they tend to not want to move from there. They think it's unnecessarily expensive.
It's the next generation threatening their generation.
Yeah, and from my point of view, that stuff isn't very threatening, right? Like, and in fact, if I've got someone that's young and enthusiastic and is doing the work for me and comes to my shop and it like is excited, to be like, what about this update? As long as we can have an informed discussion about it, it's a great place to be.
Yeah.
And with all these resources that people have, I know Brett Perkins and Pat McCarthy are talking about doing a new educational thing. There's Fakir, there's APP, but there's also, and you and I both know this, there's UKAPP, there's BMX, there's LBP. We're in Brazil teaching classes.
GEP.
There is so much more information, and probably one of the most accessible forms is the APP online education, which is just top notch. It's fantastic. I was like really thrilled to be a part of it, and then I got to watch the videos and take the classes, and I was just like, I'm learning something. This is fantastic, and I learn something every time I watch them.
Especially because it has like a really competitive price point. So I think even the people who might, I mean, lazy is the wrong word for it, but the people who maybe don't want to have to put in a lot of effort to track down the best information, we're some of the cheapest information also, so that really drives a lot of people to that class, and then they get this great educational package for like a really affordable price. Right.
Well, the price has to be good because I'm donning the APP president hat, our mission is to provide information and make that information readily available. There is certain financial restrictions on that. Like we can't take a loss on that class as nice as it would be. It's not in our best interest or the interest of long-term education. But if you're in a small town and you're not able to charge a lot of money for your piercings, or if you're in another country, and even though like an OSHA United States bloodborne pathogens class isn't going to get you anywhere with your local Department of Health, it will give you some very solid information that you can then go to your shop and make improvements. And think about things critically. Maybe your shop doesn't need an improvement, and maybe you just needed some outside perspective to help you appreciate what has already been built.
Well, one of my favorite things about it is it's made specifically for the body piercing industry. I mean, if you think that you're taking a bloodborne recertification every year, and I've been piercing for almost 20 years, I've taken that BBP course over and over and over and over again, and with the exception of the ones that I've done at conference or online through the APP, they've had nothing to do with the body piercing industry. It's always been just kind of like, if there is blood, you need to clean it up. And then if you ask the instructor, what's the most appropriate disinfectant? What's the most appropriate PPE? They just look at you and they're like, well, whatever you need in your state, and it's like you can't get those specific answers unless you go to industry-specific education.
Right, and I think we also owe a debt of gratitude to like Dave Vidra, who was doing that industry-specific BBP very early on, and I'm sure several others. I don't want to have a brain fart and forget anybody, but I think specifically of his class was just like, all right, here is all of this information that's really helpful and specific to my situation. In the same way that if you're a nurse, right? Like you want something that's specific to your industry, and I get that. People need that because it makes them safer.
Do you feel like more education will be skewed towards online learning in the next few years? And where do you think the line is of what's appropriate for online learning versus what's not?
I think we'll find out.
Yeah.
One of the issues with online learning is that the second you print it, it's dated.
Yeah.
And there's that constant need to reevaluate. So you need people that are really, really motivated to keep the information fresh, update when necessary. And one of the nice things about specifically the APB bloodborne pathogens class is that states change their rules regularly, so the class is being constantly reevaluated to make
because
sure
it has all the options for like the California version, the Florida version, all these different things.
Right. And people will ask things like, hey, why is there a sterile gloves section in a bloodborne pathogens class? That's never been required. Well, certain states actually want that, and rather than just take it out for I'm picking one out of a hat, but like a South Carolina specific class, it made sense that, hey, you may want to know how to use your sterile gloves. Let's just put it in there.
Yeah.
I'd really like to see online education sort of really expands. There's a lot of effort behind the scenes to make that happen. And I think it gives us an opportunity to do things that are actually harder classes.
Yeah.
In conference, APP conference, but also all of these other conferences we were talking about, there is a limit, and that is people's attention span, people's energy level through an entire week.
Yeah.
You can actually take a 4-hour class online, make it very, very dense, and full of information, and you might not do it all 4 hours in one sitting. You might break it up, but that's the beauty of online learning.
Yeah.
There's no deadline, right? If it takes you 2 weeks to finish the class, great.
Yeah, the few times that myself and my staff have taken the course, it's been over a work day. So, it's if we have a 1 hour lull, it's like, okay, go sit and do an hour of it, and then, do this task, take a lunch break or something, come back to it. So you stay fresh and you stay engaged in it. You're not just kind of like sitting there falling asleep or checking your phone in the classroom.
Right. Yeah. And I'm hoping that we can, it's a very big challenge. I'm hoping we can get some very, very challenging, heady subjects in there. I don't know that online will ever be a good place to discuss piercing technique. I don't know if online is a great place to get into nuanced philosophical discussions.
Yeah.
On the other hand, very, very factual. Like I think of bloodborne pathogens as a good example. The facts don't change, and there's an existing standard.
Yeah, it's not opinion-based, it's
Right.
fact-based.
And I think that gives us a little bit more room for editorial content at the APP conference, but it also gives us a little bit more room for techniques classes, which people are always hungry for. We'll always have a struggle with maintaining a perfect balance there. I don't know that I nor anyone else thinks they've got that perfect formula.
Yeah.
But we're working on it, and I think more is certainly better. The more we can get out there and available to people, the better all body piercing will become.
I think it's also great too because it seems that a lot of the private education is really geared almost specifically towards technique. Like when Luis goes out and does his seminars, it's all technique. When he just kind of says, you are already experienced professionals. I'm going to trust that you know your cross-contamination, things like that, so let's just focus on techniques. So it's great to have the APP there as a resource to say, okay, you can work on your techniques, but you also need this foundation level of your safety information. Right.
That's actually interesting that you brought that up, because that was a very early on discussion, way before I was part of the Fakir Intensives, with the Fakir Intensives approach, which was, we could probably teach you health and safety by directing you to certain books or certain local community college classes. And keep in mind, this early 90s.
Yeah.
CPR and first aid is available to you. What isn't available to you at all is how to get a septum straight.
Yeah.
What's not available to you at all is like, oh, hey, that cord on a PA, you don't want to pierce through it. Here's why from experience.
Yeah.
And that was the perspective of Fakir class. Like, let's teach piercing. We're gonna cover enough health and safety to introduce the topics and make sure that, because the Fakir class is hands-on, we want to make sure that our students aren't messing up and they understand why we're changing gloves and things like that. But it's also it made updates in that class much easier. A couple years ago, Ken Coyote, who's basically the guy that's in charge, he and I were discussing our health and safety perspective and the need for an update. And it was funny was that as much as it was coming from me, it was coming from him, even though he doesn't work every day in a piercing studio. And our perspective was, we want our students to go either disposable or with instrument washers, which is way different than what you hear coming from most modern body piercers in their perspective. There still is this ultrasonic approach, and we were able to put in that block of just like, okay, we're going to update our health and safety, and let's update it for 2020, not
Right.
2015.
Right, looking forward instead of just what's right in front of you.
Yeah, but it was also a much simpler part of the class at that point.
Yeah.
It gave us more time to discuss technique,
Yeah.
and we really got to work on that part. And that's the part that I think is just so great about the Fakir class, is that it's not one person's opinion or one person's experiences. It's a group of 20 to 30 instructors over a 25-year span of time.
Yeah, so it's
Maybe-
a really wide perspective.
Yeah, and then it's distilled down to what has been a consistent for a beginner. Like, how are you going to make sure that you're successful most of the time?
Yeah.
We've got that, right? And then we were able to write in a new class, the comprehensive class, that spoke more towards experienced piercers. And that just became necessary over time because the piercers had gotten so much better. Like,
Yeah.
back to your original point of like, oh, a lot of the newest piercers have all this great information coming through the door.
Yeah.
We didn't need to explain to anybody what a circular barbell was.
Right. Right.
So the basic class still has a great place, but a lot of times if you're a more experienced piercer, you're 9 months into an apprenticeship, you're a
Yeah,
couple
you're
years
getting a
into
lot of
piercing.
repeat information.
Yeah, the comprehensive's the class for you.
So what's the percentage of like complete newbies, like people who haven't even gotten to an apprenticeship stage yet with the intensives?
Well, that's a constant change, and it really depends on class to class.
Okay.
But what we've found is that the comprehensive class is usually a lot of people that are from bigger cities,
Yeah.
And they had more access to piercers.
Right.
So they were able to train earlier and get involved earlier. The basic class tends to be people that don't have that access. Maybe
Right.
there's one good shop and they're 100 miles away,
Yeah.
and they don't get to do the Fight Club thing where they just nag them
Right.
until they're the apprentice,
Yeah.
right? Like, they have the will, and a lot of times they have the know-how from a business point of view. They need their foot in the door, and
Yeah.
that foot in the door of the basic class then gets them their apprenticeship.
Right.
And that's a big part of that basic class. It's just like, hey, we didn't turn you into a piercer, we turned you into a competent apprentice.
Right. Right.
If you don't have any other piercing training, if you haven't gotten to watch somebody reprocess tools, you can't go home and open a shop. Like,
Do you feel like there's any risk there when you take people who, you inform them, like you are not walking out of here a trained piercer, you're walking out of here with piercing knowledge? Do you feel like there's ever that gray area of people that maybe do things counter to your teaching or irresponsibly?
Absolutely. And I think one of the things about the specifically Fakir's approach is he considers like learning piercing a human right.
Right.
Which is a really interesting approach, right? Like, oh, if you want to learn how to do this, you're allowed to learn.
Yeah.
You can't help it if people take your good information and do all the stuff you said not to with
Right.
it. But I think that you can just take the whole group of piercers that have done the thing we told them not to, and they don't last very long.
Yeah.
Essentially, and this is, you can get into like free market capitalism discussion, but if you're learning how to pierce at the same time you're starting a business, at the same time you're the new person in town,
Yeah.
good luck,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
In a way, if you can get through that successfully, then you probably had what it took.
Right.
And there's a few people that I know that did the thing we asked them not to do, and they were successes, and they're great piercers. They just, sometimes people are brilliant, they're very good.
Yeah.
But I am much happier that there's something accessible to people who feel like there's no other way to get their foot in the door.
Right.
Because that's one of the things I think piercing and piercers tend to do is they forget that by making it exceptionally hard to get an apprenticeship, by making it exceptionally hard to make a living while you have an apprenticeship, you end up distilling your talent pool down
Right.
to the most privileged.
Yeah.
And often people that just have like this enormous support of their parents, which is great.
Yeah.
But if you're broke, that doesn't mean that you're
Not a lot of like the American dream piercers. Yeah.
Like you can be broke and talented.
Yeah.
The two are not mutually exclusive, and the industry suffers when we eliminate all the talent except the most privileged.
Right.
You can tell I probably think about this too much, but that's one of the reasons that I
am the APP president.
No, God, no. That's one of the reasons that I think it's really nice that there's a Fakir class.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons I'm really so happy the APP put out the apprenticeship guidelines and curriculum, because it prevents, it doesn't prevent, but it empowers apprentices that may be in an abusive situation to say...
they can understand what's professional and not professional.
Yeah, here's an outside perspective. What's going on isn't right.
Right.
The membership committee and everybody else that put so much into that, I think did a great job of presenting a nice minimum standard.
Oh, yeah.
It's great to have an objective minimum standard there. So
I think there's a pretty good likelihood that by the end of the year I'll have another apprentice.
Oh, awesome.
And I'm going to pretty much just
exciting.
use that as a framework for it.
Oh man,
Yeah.
It makes me really happy because I think a lot of the best and brightest piercers are the most reluctant to take on apprentices, and it's just like, no, do it.
There was a long period through my career where I was like, absolutely not. The industry is oversaturated, this and that, da-da-da. And then I started to think, like, the industry isn't oversaturated. The industry is very undersaturated for skilled professionals. Mm-hmm. It's oversaturated for people that are untrained and unskilled. So I'm much more open to it. I apprenticed Aaron, and then I apprenticed Evan, and they were great experiences. And I wish that I would have had an experience like that when I started my career. And I feel like I would have been a lot better in the long run for it. It took me years to unlearn bad habits and to regain that foundation that I never really started with.
Right, and I'm very thankful that I had a heck of a foundation to build on. It's really nice when that happens. And there's a lot more resources to both piercer and mentor, right? Like, maybe you would like something like the APP to as like an essential part of your apprenticeship. Like, hey, you're going to do the apprenticeship, but I need you to do the APP bloodborne pathogens class. I need you to do the personal protective equipment class. Like, these things that have been written for you and don't cost a lot. And then you've got conference and in a variety of different languages and stuff. There's a lot of opportunities there that weren't there if you were training a piercer in 1990. Yeah. Right? Yeah. That's great.
So, for anyone interested in the Fakir Intensives, where would they find that information online?
You go to www.fakir.org. That's Fakir. And under that is a thing that says Piercer Training. Click on that and it goes through all the classes.
How often do you hold the classes?
They're not regular, but there's usually 4 to 6 a year.
Is that basic and comprehensive?
Usually basic, comprehensive. My fingers are solidly crossed that we'll do another advanced next year. We don't do them often because we need enough skilled people that have taken the basic or the comprehensive that then want the final piece of the puzzle.
Right.
And it takes a while before we have a group that's ready for that and can spend the money.
Cool. All right. So if you're interested in refreshing some information or gaining new information, check out fakir.org. So next up, we're going to do a conversation about Daith piercings. I say Daith piercings, but part of what we talk about is kind of where that name came from in the first place. Jef talks about the origins of the name. We talk about the debate as to whether or not they have any therapeutic benefit for migraines. I wouldn't say that either of us are kind of arguing that they do, but it's mostly just kind of talking about how to talk about them, basically. Talking to your clients to maybe not ruin their expectations, but to make sure they have kind of like realistic expectations for it. So part 2 is going to be about that, and then stick around for part 3 where Jef talks about opening his new studio in Michigan. All right, so we're going to have another conversation about, you say Daith, right?
I say Daith, yes.
I typically say Daith, but I can say either, whatever. I'm flexible. So we talked a little bit before in a previous episode about Daith piercings related to the supposed curative effect that they have against migraines. And earlier on when we had the conversation, it was basically just kind of making this hard stance of body piercings are not medically therapeutic. They can be therapeutic for personal reasons, aesthetic reasons, things like that, but there's no proven scientific evidence that can show that there is a curative effect to it. And, I don't know how many you've done in the last year, but I've done like boatloads of them. Mm-hmm. And, I'd still say that there are people that walk through the door and they just want it because it's a cool looking piercing, but the vast majority bring up the word migraine or headache, and I always give them my boilerplate answer of, we don't offer any piercing for a therapeutic reason. There's no scientific evidence to say that this can be connected to that. We only offer it for aesthetic reasons. If you're still willing to get the piercing, I'm happy to perform it for you, as long as you understand that I'm not making any sort of claims about a medical benefit.
Right.
But still, I get all these clients who just say, I'm desperate. I understand that there is no proof. I understand that it's purely anecdotal, and that, I'm not really expecting it to do anything, but I'm still having these crippling migraines, and even my neurologist at this point has told me to come in and give it a shot. Like, what do you think about that? Are you having any sort of similar experiences?
Well, yes, for sure. And I think part of it, the industry's reaction to the Daith migraine thing was, I don't want to take too much credit for it, but I put out a blog entry about it where I said I don't think it's likely that the Daith piercing is actually medically beneficial.
Yeah.
I did say in it, and I don't think probably loudly enough, that I'm open to the idea that it's a possibility. As likely as it is that there is some evidence that it's helpful.
You feel like that's more of a placebo effect?
Well, I don't. It's so difficult to say, right? I do think that we know with placebo effect, we know that a sugar pill isn't as effective as a shot, and you can even tell the person, "I am giving you a placebo pill. Let me know how you feel in the morning."
Yeah.
And then the next day you give them a placebo shot, and they will report the shot as being more effective. When you get into a Daith piercing, which I've had mine a few times, it's not always the easiest one to get done. We're ramping it up that next level,
right?
To, I don't want to say surgery, right? But
it's physical contact, breaking the skin,
and it's there, and it takes months to heal, right? That's a big thing. So it's in terms of like it's placebo on steroids in that regard, if it's placebo. Right, and I'm still open to the fact that it may not be. It could be effective, but until there's science to back that up, then we don't know. But that's kind of the discussion that I have, and I'm fortunate, sort of fortunate and not fortunate. My shop's not super busy right now. It's only a couple months old. I have plenty of time to have this discussion with people, and I will never say no, I won't pierce you for that. And the last thing I'll say is that's stupid, right? Because a big part of my issue is that I don't want to see piercers take advantage of
people in desperation.
Yeah, and migraines can put you in a very desperate state. I understand that, but not taking advantage of them also means you're not ridiculing them or poo-pooing their last-ditch effort, right? So I think there's a really important middle road that you can walk where you still do the piercing.
Yeah, I'm not a terribly empathetic person, but when people tell, believe it. When people tell me these stories, like it sometimes it really resonates with me, and I've never had a migraine. I've had bad headaches. But I've never woken up and realized that, like, my day is ruined now because I can't get out of bed, I can't open my eyes, I can't be in bright light, anything like that. I've never experienced that.
Right.
And these people who say, I've gotten Botox injections in the side of my head, I've gotten, nerve block surgery, I've done this, I've done that, I've done all these extreme measures, and now, like, I'm willing to try anything, and I'm even willing to try a body piercing, which I've never been interested in before.
Yeah.
Part of me is like, cool, welcome to my world, you're gonna love it kind of thing, but I don't want to even imply to those people, but I also don't want to take away that potential for hope in the back of their mind. I don't want to be like, oh, you have absolutely no chance at all whatsoever. So I try to give them this very soft answer of, well, as long as you're comfortable with the fact that I'm not offering this for any therapeutic reason, if you're still looking to get the piercing because you want it as a piercing, I'm happy to perform that for you. And
I think that's probably the most sensitive and professional way to handle it.
Yeah.
One of the things that really frightens me, and what I think a lot of piercers, and I don't think there's a ton of piercers out there that are offering this for therapeutic reasons, but the ones that do tend to very, very loudly.
Yeah, very blatantly.
One of the things that I don't think they realize is that if they're going to do that, they need a completely different form of insurance.
Yeah.
And it's probably going to be quite a bit more expensive.
I would imagine that the first time there's a lawsuit because someone sued for false advertising, that will shut a lot of those people up.
Yeah, and then who knows how long that will take, right? But you don't want to be the person that happened to. And it's not what false advertising is the best case scenario.
Yeah,
medical
practicing
malpractice
medicine without a license.
Yeah, that's the one that's scary.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing is, I'm kind of torn with Daith piercing because it's one of my favorite piercings, right? I've written about it because I think the name is cool and the pronunciation's cool, and I like that story. I'm just the biggest fan of Eric Dakota. And
do you want to give people like the short version background of it?
Oh yeah, it's also published in The Point, but very briefly. Eric Dakota did the first Daith piercing, supposedly, in Santa Cruz, California, on a young woman named Teresa. Teresa was teaching herself Hebrew. I'm inferring that she was probably doing Kabbalah, and named the piercing Daith, which is the Hebrew word for knowledge, and it's spelled D-A-I-T-H. And she's close, but not right. It would have been D-A''A-T dots. Or D-A''A''S, DAS. And it's the knowledge of the tree of life. And who knows, right? I also was teaching a class on the Daith where I made that reference, and apparently the piercing had been done beforehand at the Gauntlet under a different name entirely, and I forget what that name was. But the Daith name spelling pronunciation stuck in large part because I think Eric's such a charismatic and sort of revered figure.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's the background on this spelling. So I'm just a huge fan of it. I also think like there's a very specific angle that it needs to be at, and the one that makes it look the most aesthetically pleasing and doesn't interfere with rook piercings and stuff. So I really geek out on the piercing, and I would hate for the fact that let's say it turns out that it does cure migraines, right? It is the miracle cure that everyone's hoping it is. That's, in a way, that's awesome and super powerful, right? But I tend to think piercers won't be allowed to do it anymore.
Well, I mean, there's a pretty strong precedent, and I think that hopefully it would be kind of grandfathered in, where I'm sure that if it was proven, the medical industry would ramp it up into some ridiculous fashion that's a little bit farther away from body piercing, where they can charge $1,000 for it instead of maybe $50 or $100 for it.
Right. And but you could see like it's in the realm of possibility that that your Department of Health says, hey, you are not allowed to do that. That's for doctors.
You're
only.
not a qualified Daith healer.
Exactly.
Right.
And so I don't necessarily think that's likely, but it's in the realm of possibility.
Yeah.
But it could also mean that our insurance rates go through the roof, right? It's a very complicated issue, and I think it's. I don't think there's an easy answer. I don't think there's one right way to approach the thing. But what you were saying, the way you talk to your customers about it, I think is really sensitive, really professional. I do something very, very similar.
Yeah, I was never really. I wouldn't consider myself dismissive in the way that I talked to them before, but I was very clear that do not expect a benefit, kind of thing. Not really like crushing their dreams, but maybe taking away a little bit of their hope. And now it's just kind of one of those things where I've said what I need to say. If you still want it, if you still have faith in your Daith, then let's go for it, And I love doing that piercing. But so you were saying that Rick Free mentioned that there's a potential study in the works?
Yeah, and this is a casual mention online that I hope I'm getting correct. But Rick Free, who's at 23rd Street, had mentioned that there was some kind of study that has either been performed or is ongoing. One of the things that I think I zoomed in on early was that it didn't seem to matter if you had actually gotten your Daith pierced for it to be effective.
Okay.
And I say that because I read a lot about it, and there was a lot of people that were getting rooks and forward helixes. They got my Daith pierced and my migraines are gone. And she's like, oh, clearly this has way more to do with the belief than it does with the location.
Right.
So interesting, not to digress too far, but that's actually true of acupuncture too. It's very, very difficult to do a blind study on acupuncture. How do you fake it, right?
Right.
But what they are able to do is say, like, okay, here's the traditional Chinese medicine version of where you're supposed to poke the needle on the ear for this condition,
Right.
and measure that versus the wrong spot. And it doesn't seem to matter.
Right.
Any spot seems to be equally effective. They call it sham acupuncture is as effective. It seems like sham Daith piercings are equally effective.
Right.
And I do have that discussion with my clients when they're not well suited for the Daith piercing and they're very, very desperate. It's like, well, it turns out that I don't think it matters where it goes.
Yeah.
And people that, and this is, again, a very small minority of piercers that are like, oh, we're the only ones that know the specific angle.
The magic spot.
Yeah.
I forget what piercer it was, but they posted some kind of gripe on Facebook where a client called and said, do you have anyone there who's qualified to perform a Daith piercing for migraines, because my friend got pierced and her piercer said that they were the only studio in the state that was qualified because they knew the magic spot.
Yeah, and you wonder how tongue-in-cheek that shop was being when they said that, or if they were deadly serious.
I would imagine it's a situation where it's a piercer who doesn't necessarily have that long, thoughtful conversation, and it's basically just like, oh, sure, I could do that. They do a piercing, they get some sort of anecdotal follow-up a week later, like, oh, I haven't had a headache all week, and then like, oh, I am a miracle worker.
Yeah, there's actually I listened to too many podcasts. There's an interesting thing that happens with magicians, where certain magicians...
Where they actually get laid? That's pretty interesting. Watch me pull a date out of my hat.
No, but well played. No, where they actually start to believe that they have powers.
Right.
They start to they get baffled by their own BS, and it's a really interesting thing, because I think that can happen to piercers too. Because when someone comes in and is like kissing your feet, like, you've saved me, it's really powerful.
Yeah.
And it's tough not to
Drink your own Kool-Aid.
Yeah, it's like, that's very intoxicating, right? Like, you want to be the person that saved it. Like, who doesn't feel good after that, right? But it's such a dangerous and slippery slope between. And I always say, like, the balance bands thing. Balance bands worked until they didn't. Right? Like, and the people that sold them, I don't think were necessarily bad people. I think they really genuinely believed that, like, a magnet in their silicone band made a difference, right? And I don't think the people that bought them were stupid, right? Like, Kobe Bryant's not a stupid guy, right? Like, he
it's an easy fix, and people like easy fixes.
Yeah. And really, at the end of the day, it was like a good luck charm. Like, if you had any faith in it, it was effective, right? So, is that Daith piercings? I don't know. I'm still open to the fact that they could be proven somewhat effective.
I would love it somewhere down the road if there was a study that, even if it said 10% of people had a positive proven effect. You know, I think it would be great, but I'm not really holding my breath for that study.
I think the real challenge is you can't, there is no control. Right? You know when you've gotten your Daith pierced or when you haven't. The only hope they can have is that if they do it, they give you a forward helix or a rook or a conch or something else.
Yeah. Well, that's expecting a lot from the people performing the study to even understand the difference rather than just like, oh, you got your cartilage pierced.
Right. And how many of them are even pronouncing it correctly with any sort of input from the piercing industry at large, right? Like it's reaching the most important people is very, very challenging. When I think the big thing is like if you see an article about it in your newspaper or on the news or anything, give those people a call and give them some perspective. Just like, hey, Huffington Post, I saw you post this. There's other information from really reputable sources. Why don't you get in touch with the Association of Professional Piercers?
Because the APP put out a statement, was it like almost a year and a half ago at this point?
Yeah. You know what's really interesting is it seems like we've been doing the migraine cure forever.
Yeah.
Laura, my wife, had stopped piercing when she was 8.5 months pregnant.
Okay.
My son is now 2 years old, and she just came back to start piercing again. She did her first Daith for a curative effect.
Yeah.
From the client was asking for it for that reason 2 months ago.
Right.
She had never done one.
Yeah.
I was like, man, it seems like we've been doing this for 5 years.
Yeah.
I was like, this is still a new thing.
Yeah, it's just, of all the piercings it could have been too, it's kind of weird to me that it's that one, and I would love to find out eventually if somebody like Paul King or somebody into anthropology wants to really dig down to the bottom of it and figure out where it came from, because maybe it was just that it was a really rare period, like a Doug Malloy kind of origin.
No, if anybody's going to have their finger on it, it's Jim Weber.
Okay.
I'm just remembering I was supposed to mail him something. Jim Weber, that owns Infinite Piercing in Philadelphia, he has been doing a lot of research on where it started.
Okay.
And there's a very early article, I want to say it was a State University in New York group, and it was ostensibly like a clinical study.
Yeah.
So it may have started with a study.
Okay.
Interestingly, and you wonder, like, it almost seems like the group got assigned a project and they all happened to have this piercing because it was popular on their campus.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, I haven't had any migraines. Who knows, right? Like, but Jim Weber is probably the guy that I would go to about that. My first digging back, I found was it a chiropractor or a neurosurgeon? I forget which, and that's a very big difference. But he had a blog, and he had said, I think this might be effective.
Yeah.
With, like, no possible, like, cause.
Do you feel like it was ever just like somebody was like clicking around on the internet, they saw that piercing, and then they just happened to look at like an old acupuncture chart, and they're like, oh, that piercing's right where this thing says you put a pin to cure a migraine. This probably cures a migraine.
It's altogether possible.
Yeah.
And it has all of the pizzazz of those early Doug Malloy stories, which are hearing those from Fakir is something else, actually.
Yeah, the whole story about the Roman soldiers holding their cape on with their nipple piercings and all that, like, that's gold.
It's totally, like, I was just like, oh my god, that doesn't even kind of and I know we're getting way off topic, but Paul King and I were in the Anthropological Museum in Mexico, and he and I were going around, and we saw some of the body jewelry displayed, and they had it put it in certain ways where we were just like, from a body piercing perspective, this doesn't make sense to us. Maybe it's right. Maybe this is exactly how they wore it. But he's like, what do you think they did? I was like, I think this would need a wood back that's long since dissolved.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, that's what I think. And I think that thing that they've got, like a string of pearls through the holes in it, the chart said, like, oh, we use these, we believe that they use these necklaces to hold the earrings in place. I'm just like, I think these are just necklaces.
Yeah.
And I think the jewelry is held in place by wood stoppers.
I
Essentially,
saw this,
the old O-rings.
Yeah. I saw this insane, like, thing that was supposedly for a stretched labret piercing, like very largely stretched, but it was this gigantic gold ornate dragon head with this huge tongue, and it's like, I don't even imagine how even a very strong lip could physically hold that much weight. there. So I think that they're just kind of making assumptions about maybe some sort of like ornamental thing, ceremonial. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, but it's kind of the fun of those museums when you have a little bit of piercing knowledge.
Yeah.
Like, wow, how much does it change the way the way the body works?
Yeah.
Because I've tried that and it
Who
failed.
are the
right?
ad wizards who came up with this one?
Right. Yeah. So dots. Who knows?
Who knows? Well, maybe like 20 years from now, we'll look back on it and be like, oh, yeah, we were right. We were all curing migraines.
Yeah. I do. Imagine how silly we'll look.
Yeah, I could have charged a lot more. So up last, we're going to talk to Jef about his new studio, Gamma Piercing in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and how that came about. For a long time, Jef owned Rockstar Piercing in Providence, Rhode Island, a pretty big shop, and he made the personal decision to kind of step away from that business and lead more of a family life, and eventually he would open a smaller boutique studio, Gamma Piercing. So we're going to talk to Jef and his journey doing that, and next week we'll be back with another interview for you. So another subject we can talk about. You owned a pretty well-known studio in the Providence, Rhode Island area, Rockstar, and you decided to kind of move away from that larger studio, and now you've opened kind of like a more of maybe like a boutique kind of feel studio in Michigan?
Yes.
So what are some of like what's some of your motivation behind that, and what are some of the lessons you learned going in from kind of a larger studio to purposely a smaller studio?
Well, I mean, so there's a lot to discuss with that. Rockstar was my first love. I wouldn't have sold the shops if my wife and I weren't in the situation where we wanted to move closer to her family because we had started a family. I loved it. I still love it. I'm so happy for the people that own it now, which is my former business partner and my old apprentice, Peter Jett. They're doing great things with it. They relocated one of them, and it's beautiful.
The bigger or the smaller studio?
The first that was busier but was smaller is now on the first floor, which we had never had a first floor studio. They moved to a bigger space with 2 piercing rooms, and that was something that shop had needed for years. And we weren't ever able to find the right spot, and then they were motivated to do it, and they pulled the trigger in a really nice way. I think
that's great.
They've got an awesome thing going on.
I'd imagine it's like a feel-good moment when you can kind of pass the torch to someone who keeps it going rather than lets it decline.
No, not only that, but improves upon it.
Yeah.
Genuinely. And so there's a lot that was interesting in the couple of years that separated me leaving Rockstar and opening Gamma. It was 2 months shy of 2 years. So in that time, I got to do a lot of guest spots around the country, and I went to so many piercing facilities, like smaller boutique ones, like Modern Ritual in Ohio, big, crazy busy shops. Like I've always guest pierced at Infinite in Philadelphia and 23rd Street in Oklahoma, all those different experiences. I got to see what was working in an area and what wasn't working, what I liked about the way I did things. And then in the middle of it, I got to do a guest spot at Rockstar again.
Yeah.
And I think that was probably the most eye-opening thing, because I got to see the changes that were made. I was very impressed. But in addition, I felt at home, but not in a way that, like, sure, I was piercing my old regulars, right? Like, that felt like at home.
Yeah.
But I felt comfortable in my own skin as a piercer. I think there's a huge value in that. Like, one of the things about guest piercing is it takes you out of your comfort zone and makes you sort of learn, and that's great. But once I was back in my comfort zone, I was twice the piercer I was anywhere else. I was significantly better at it.
I feel like one of the biggest impacts on my career is going to work at Pinpoint in Oslo, Norway, because Christiana and Sala they're so refined and they're so professional, and their studio is so thoughtfully laid out that just being in that kind of environment, like, if you have skills, it polishes them to such a degree where you go home and then you're kind of emulating what you learned there, and it made me a lot more well-rounded, and my studio a lot more well-rounded too.
Yeah, I definitely had those experiences where I was like, I learned so much from the people I was going to. Well, long story short, when we started to build Gamma, I knew a couple things had to be carried over from Rockstar, and the first thing was the second Rockstar was my first fully disposable shop, and I'd fallen in love with it. To this day, I still think it's just a really wonderful way to do body piercing, and it's the one that I'm the most comfortable with. But I also knew that from a jewelry perspective exactly what I wanted the shop to look like, and it was very, very different from what I had done at Rockstar initially. I definitely wanted a really small, curated selection. And this was based in large part on what was Cody Vaughn was doing at Vaughn Body Arts in Monterey, because that was one of the shops that I would go to and like, oh, he's really out-thought me on this.
Yeah, because it seems like he's put a lot of specific thought into what he wants and almost specifically what he doesn't want.
Yeah. And that was one of the what jewelry I didn't want was a big part of it.
Yeah.
And when you go to the shop, I think at first you're sort of struck by how little is in it. And in large part, that's because we ran out of money. But the other part was that I was never going to blow you away with my jewelry selection. It was always going to be very small, very curated. And I still have plenty of jewelry that I'm going to add, but it's still probably going to look a lot pared down from other piercing shops.
Well, I think one of the biggest mistakes that people who are a little bit younger in their career, they think they need everything, and they spend so much money that they could use for shop improvements and personal improvements, education, things like that, on jewelry they'll never sell, and it just sits there in the case.
Yeah, and that was something I did at Rockstar, and they've since pared down from this, but I had every color gemstone anatometal made in every size navel curve, every nostril screw, every 16 gauge threaded end. There's a tremendous amount of jewelry that could only be used in one or two piercings, right? Having a ton of navel jewelry is all well and good, but I'm not doing 20 navels a day, right? And doing a ton of nostrils, not everyone wants nostril screws. So when we opened Gamma, we didn't even carry any nostril screws. It made more sense for us to be able to multitask the jewelry. And it's not that I'm against nostril screws, but from a financial point of view, they didn't make a lot of sense for me.
Well, I mean, it's not like you have to have it, and I feel like a lot of my clients, I'm the same way. I have maybe 10 nostril screw options, and those are only for the people that specifically ask for them. And then I have everything else in threadless. And when I explain it to people, especially the people who have already worn nostril screws, they say, oh yeah, that makes so much sense. I hated having that little tail inside my nose.
And then one of the other things that was really different for me, Rockstar at one point, I think at its most, we had 15 employees.
Wow.
So it was a monstrous shop in terms of coordination. And I had really capable, awesome people managing and ordering jewelry and stuff. But and I think you're probably in a unique position to appreciate this. As much as you might go in with the dictator approach, it's my way or the highway. That doesn't really work if you want to have a good working relationship with people. You've got to listen to their input. And with 14 other people at the shop giving me their input constantly, it sort of stifled the thing that I think I'm the best at, which is trying new things. Doing new things, then 3 days later figuring out it didn't work and starting new happens all the time at Gamma. Right? I get to do that whenever I want because it's just me and my wife. And I still have to negotiate with my wife, and thank God, because the shop would not be nearly as good if I didn't have her as like a voice of reason. But it's just us. So I get to try all these crazy things. I got to spend $5,000 on an aftercare sheet, right?
What?
And It's awesome. If I had to do it again, I'd spend 10.
Yeah?
Like, I love my aftercare sheet.
Wow.
And it's expensive, but my philosophy going into our aftercare sheet, which I built with Danny Greenwood from Cold Steel, was that I'm asking more and more from my customers in terms of the amount of money that they're spending, right? And I think you've probably been in the situation where you spend a lot of money on a piece of electronic equipment, or whatever, new PlayStation. And if you're like me, one of the things you really enjoy is when you go home, opening the package, and then going through all the instructions, and just like, okay, I didn't even know my GoPro did this. I'm so glad I have that. But I was selling people $1,000 pieces of jewelry and then giving them a photocopied one-page thing that didn't talk about their jewelry at all.
Right.
Didn't make sense to me at all.
Yeah.
So we made the aftercare sheet and jewelry users manual.
Okay.
And so the aftercare portion's very similar to everything I always said at Rockstar. That wasn't where I spent money or went crazy. It was developing graphic design and images for
the
jewelry side. And then the graphic design was relatively expensive because Danny's a friend of mine. But when you're buying as many aftercare sheets as I was, it was a big, scary experiment.
Yeah.
And it wasn't $5,000 up front, but it definitely will be that over the course of a year, considering how popular the aftercare sheet was and how I'm just giving it to everybody because I'm really proud of it, and I think it really...
Well, it's really good advertisement, too, even if they haven't become a customer yet.
Yeah, they understand how their jewelry works, and I think there's a huge value for even people that aren't my customers, that they understand, like, this is how press-fit jewelry works. This is how internal threading works.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, it's like you feel those waves in the force of body piercing. And when you kind of released your aftercare packet, I heard from several other people that weren't you, and it's like, you gotta see this. You gotta see this aftercare packet. It's crazy. It's so well thought out and designed. And then I went and I looked at it, and everybody was raving about it. So whatever you invested in, it seems to have paid off.
I'm pleased. I'm very pleased, and I hope we actually sell it to other shops now. People will just take it. We're changing the photos and updating the graphic design, but then we'll add their logo to it. And if they have want to change the text on it, I'm not proud. You can change the text. Like, we'll work with you. But that's been really cool. And she and I are actually starting a company together based on that success.
Yeah, that's great.
But yeah, taking chances like that with Gamma, which wasn't possible with Rockstar, or if it was going to be, I don't want to say watered down. It was going to be contributed to in a way that wasn't always to my liking. Yeah. And that's not their fault. That's sort of me being like me.
You have to have this balance of, I'm going to delegate some things to trusted individuals, but at the same time, I have to understand that it's going to be their decisions and their input that influence my business.
Right. And I really had just wonderful people doing it that were so talented and were bringing, from a jewelry selection point of view, when you go to Rockstar, you're just being impressed with the jewelry combos. Yeah. Every time I go there, I'm just like, wow, this is crazy. I don't have that kind of eye for jewelry. Yeah. So it's funny because now with Gamma, when I need to get something outside of the standards, I really need to defer and look at what other shops are doing and sort of okay, I get it. It's not one of my natural abilities, but it's been fun. Yeah.
How do you feel like your market has responded to it? Do you feel like they're comparing you to other shops in the area, or do you feel like they're kind of taking you as your own individual experience?
Well, that's actually been a really fun thing because the area that I'm in has 130,000 people, and there's one shop. Yeah. Providence had about 30,000 more people. I owned two myself in that town, and there were about 5 other competitors.
Okay.
Right. So, and I didn't think I had a lot of competition in Providence. So, when I moved to this area, I had actually talked with the other piercers at the other shop, and they were very, very friendly and wished me luck. But one of the piercers was like, it's gonna be weird having somebody else in town. And I was just like, honestly, we're gonna have 2 different clienteles, and that's exactly the way it's worked.
Great.
They are an excellent shop. They do a great job, and there's gonna be people that respond to the vibe of our shop better than the vibe of their shop. I think they're really,
and vice versa.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The vibe of their shop's really fun, and there's a lot of colors. It's a really, really pretty shop. Our shop is black and white.
Yeah.
And we're parents, and we talk like parents, and a lot of times I never thought I'd be saying this, especially back when I was at Rockstar, but like we're the shop for soccer moms, right? Because we are in effect soccer parents, right? Like that's where we are, and it's a really nice, very, very laid back environment. We've heard really positive responses, and I think I'm looking forward to expanding on that relationship with the community. But I couldn't like Ann Arbor's clients more. They are wonderful. A breath of fresh air. And I will say, like, I'm not. New England has a certain type of person, and they're great. I'm a New Englander. Like, I always will be, but they're very strong-willed.
Yeah.
And a lot of times that kind of put me on edge. Ann Arbor is much more Midwest.
Okay.
And that sort of more relaxed, more friendly approach, I think I needed at this point in my life.
Do you see yourself trying to grow and expand this shop, or do you feel like you intentionally want to try to keep it smaller?
I don't know. A lot is the shop's been open just about 3 months, and we were open for 3 weeks while the students were in town.
Okay.
Then there was graduation, and in a college town, the week of graduation is always slow. Then the students left, mass exodus, and I mean we're not just in a college town, we're on a college campus.
Okay.
So it was an absolute ghost town, and then the construction began, and when I say the construction began, it all around my shop is completely closed down because of construction.
Okay.
And we're still busy.
Really?
We're actually much busier than I think we have any business being, considering all of the construction and the fact that there's no students around.
Yeah.
When 90% of the population returns in September, I don't know that keeping it small is going to be a possibility.
Right.
Now, maybe it is. Maybe the students actually don't really like who wants to get pierced by dad, right?
Yeah.
Right? And that might be the response that I get. We don't know. So I'm trying to let it find its own natural path.
Yeah, organic growth.
Yeah, and if that means that we've got to add an extra piercing room and I hire 2 more piercers, then so be it.
Yeah.
Right? But if it also means that I'm forever a 7 to 12 piercing a day shop, I'll be just fine with that.
Honestly, that's my sweet spot. That's what I prefer. My shop has grown a lot over the years, and I'm in this spot now where my shop is very large, a lot of staff, and a lot of business, and I wouldn't honestly say that I'm happier for it. I'm not unhappy for it, but it's very difficult having to put on those like boss pants.
It's a very different set of problems.
Yeah.
Right? And a very different set of privileges, right? Like when you go to conference and you're ogling jewelry, right? You've got the money to you're not gonna
and
splurge.
Just the fact that I can be at conference and not have my studio closed. I have my staff, and we're sitting here in Brazil,
right?
And my studio's open and it's fully staffed.
Yeah. And whereas I had to find guest piercers, and of course that's not a thing when you're a boutique shop. Yeah. And it's APP conference, right? Like, so we were closed most of that week. It's I feel like I don't think Rockstar for me was ever quite as big as Precision is for you. But it was a lot of employees, a lot of personalities, and it's tough because I don't know which shoes I'd rather be in. Right?
Yeah.
There's a thing that's great about the financial security.
I go back and forth, and I read some of your posts, and I see how happy you are, and I'm just like, oh, I'm jealous of that.
I think had I just left Rockstar and immediately opened Gamma, this would not be the posts you'd be seeing.
Yeah.
I think a large part it was the 2 solid years of both other work. Like while I was building Gamma, for a short spell, I worked at a brewery, figuring out if I wanted to brew beer. I don't. Maybe as a hobby, but not as a job. And I was also helping my father-in-law out. So there were days where, and I'm not joking, I was taking phone calls from Fakir Musafar while I was delivering meat to restaurants.
Okay.
These were weird days
That's
for
a duality.
me. Yeah, I was like, this is a very strange life I'm living.
Both hang from hooks.
Right. So, but yeah, like I gained a lot of perspective.
Yeah.
And becoming a dad changed things. So there's a lot that was like significantly different. One of the things that I didn't mention was that I had a partner at Rockstar.
Yeah.
Who was a business partner.
Yeah.
We're friends, but we weren't. I went to his wedding, and I knew his kids.
But it's not like you were hanging out.
We weren't
on
hanging
weekends.
out, right? Yeah. And he didn't know anything. There was a point where I pierced his daughter's ears, and her jewelry fell out, and he had no idea how it worked.
Okay.
It's like, you've been buying thousands of dollars of this for years, but you don't know how it works. That's funny.
Now you can give him your booklet.
Now I can give him the booklet, right?
Yeah.
No, and it's funny because my partner in this shop is my wife, who is a piercer and frustratingly good at it in a way that really drives me crazy because, she just took about a year and a half off maternity leave, came back and was already piercing just so well. I was just like, how did you not? Oh my God, it's so annoying. But yeah, but she's my partner in it, and it's way different for me to have a partner that is also a piercer and has perspective. And and fortunately, she and I see eye to eye most of the time. Really,
I'd hope so.
Well, no, I can imagine that you could do this thing as a husband and wife team, and the way it could work is that all of my harebrained ideas she shot down.
Yeah.
And she doesn't do that. She really makes me sound it out, because one of the things that I'm good at is having this crazy idea and just going for it. And she's there to be like, make me think it through.
Okay.
And at the end of it, very rarely do I still think. Do I still approach the idea the same way? But it always ends up being a better idea once she's through with it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, partners in life, partners in business.
Yeah, that part is working out really, really nicely.
Yeah. That's great. I'm really happy to see it, because I could see, I wouldn't say that you looked unhappy at all during the Rockstar years, but I could see the frustration sometimes. I could see the joy and the pride too.
Sure.
But I could see the frustration, and then when you took that time off, and then just seeing you go through the process of building Gamma, you just always had this big smile on your face. Even if you looked stressed, it would still be this prideful stress.
Yeah. I'm glad you noticed that. Thank you. And yeah, it's been a really, really wonderful experience. I couldn't have a better town. I couldn't have a better partner. Even from a competition point of view, wonderful competitors.
Yeah,
that,
no bricks through your window.
Right. I can send them stuff that for example, I don't do surface anchors.
Yeah.
Right. I can send them work.
That's great.
Right? It's great. And we spoke ahead of time. She's like, hey, if you see a consistent issue, let me know. They're like, oh yeah, same thing here. And of course I don't. It's great. So it's just a lot of the headaches that you could have, I've avoided.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I mean, that's literally living the dream.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if people want to find your shop, where do they find it in the world and on the internet?
So we are 1214 South University Avenue, Ann Arbor, Michigan. And my website is www.gammapiercing.com. And the aftercare sheet that we were talking about, there's a PDF that you can download for free of it if you just want to see it. And that's under the aftercare heading. You can also find me at piercingnerd.com where I write piercing stuff. But yeah, please stop by the shop. It's fun.
Yeah, great. All right. Well, I wish you continued success.
Thanks.
For more information about the show, visit piercingwizardpodcast.com or like Piercing Wizard Podcast on Facebook. For more info about your host, visit precisionbodyarts.com or search Ryan PBA on Facebook, Instagram, and Tumblr. If you enjoy the show, you can subscribe on iTunes, Apple Podcast, and Google Play. Music by Benny B. Blanco. Show copyright 2017, Precision Body Arts LLC, all rights reserved.